If you pick up something in your mead, but you can't put it into clear words, your score sheet gets weaker on the Beer Judge Certification Program exam. Not because you missed it, because you couldn't describe it clearly. And that's where a lot of people get stuck. So let's go through the way it actually happens at the table. You're sitting there, glass in your hand, timer running. You bring it up to your nose, and something makes you pause. That pause is where people lose confidence, because now you're thinking instead of describing. So here's the shift. If you smell it or taste it, it's there. Your job is to describe it clearly and to connect it to a likely cause. And as you do that, you're always working in three parts: aroma, flavor, and mouthfeel, even if you notice them all at once. You're also judging intensity, low, medium, or high. That matters because it affects how the mead is scored. And one more layer on top of that. Every time you write something down, you're deciding, does this belong in the style or is it a fault? That's judging. So let's start with oxidation. Instead of something fresh and bright, the mead smells stale. Paper, wet cardboard, stale bread. Then you taste it, and that same stale character carries through. If there's fruit, it may come across more like dried fruit than fresh fruit. Sometimes you'll even notice a slight increase in bitterness. And there's another version of it too. More developed oxidation can come across as sherry-like, nutty, or almond-like. So you say it clearly: stale, papery, wet cardboard. Oxidation character suggests post-fermentation oxygen exposure. Or, if it's more developed, sherry-like, nutty, oxidative notes, suggesting an advanced oxidation. Now the next sample. You take a sip, and the alcohol stands out right away. It's not smooth, not just warming. It's sharp, hot, harsh. If it goes far enough, it can even seem slightly solvent-like. Now that's Fusel alcohol, and it usually points back to elevated fermentation temperature or yeast stress, or both. So instead of hesitating, you connect it: harsh, hot, solvent-like alcohol, which suggests Fusel alcohols likely from elevated fermentation temperature or yeast stress. Now here's where people really start second-guessing. You smell spice, like clove and pepper, and that can be completely fine depending on the yeast. But then there's another version: Band-Aid, plastic, medicinal, antiseptic. That's just not spicy. That's chlorophenol, and that usually comes from chlorine or chloramine getting into the process, either from untreated water or cleaning residue. So you separate it clearly: medicinal plastic-like phenolic character, suggesting chlorophenol formation from chlorine or chloramine exposure. Bad water. Now the next one doesn't give you much time to think. You bring the glass up and it hits you immediately. Rotten egg, sulfur. That's hydrogen sulfide. If it's there, it belongs on the evaluation. This usually points back to yeast stress, often tied to nutrient issues. So you say it: rotten egg sulfur aroma indicates hydrogen sulfide from stress fermentation. Now the evaluation shifts. You take a sip, and something feels sharp, not obvious like sulfur, not clearly defined like oxidation, just sharper than expected. And this is where you have to make a call. Clean acidity should feel crisp. It should lift the mead. But if it turns sharp, biting, or like vinegar, that's different. That's acetic acid. Sometimes you'll notice a slight solvent-like edge with it, and that usually points to oxygen exposure or bacterial activity. So you make the call. Sharp vinegar-like acidity suggests acetic acid, possibly from oxygen exposure or bacterial activity. And sometimes you'll get more than one signal at the same time. For example, that vinegar note with a slight solvent edge. In that case, you describe both. Now it gets more subtle. You smell green apple, fresh cut pumpkin. Now you pause again. Is this just young, or is this something incomplete? It's acetaldehyde. And the safest connection here is incomplete fermentation or pulling the mead off the yeast too early. So you write it. Green apple character suggests acetaldehyde, likely from incomplete fermentation. And then one more. You pick up butter, butterscotch, maybe even a slight slickness in the mouth. In mead, this usually doesn't belong. That's diacetyl or diacetyl. And it points back to incomplete yeast cleanup or sometimes contamination. So you say it clearly. Buttery or butterscotch character suggests diacetyl, likely from incomplete yeast cleanup or contamination. Now step back for a second. Every one of these follows the same pattern. You notice it. You describe it clearly. You connect it to a cause. If you skip any part of that, the score sheet gets weaker. And vague words don't help. Off, weird, bad. Those don't describe anything. Specific language does. Something like, stale peppery oxidation character reduces freshness, likely due to oxygen exposure post-fermentation. That's clear, that's useful. That's what they're looking for. And once you start seeing that pattern, everything connects. These faults just don't happen. They come from process. Oxygen, temperature, water, nutrients, sanitation. When you understand that, you just don't recognize them faster. You understand why they're there. And that's the skill this exam is actually testing. And it's the same skill that makes your mead better. If you want to go deeper into less obvious, more advanced off flavors, that's what part 3 is going to cover. That's where this really sharpens up. That video will be coming out in a few weeks, so keep checking back on the channel. Happy mead making, and good luck with your tasting.